Teach me about the Great Lakes. Teach me about the Great Lakes. Welcome back to Teach Me About the Great Lakes, the world's most timely and regular Great Lakes podcast. My name is Stuart Carlton. I work with Illinois Indiana Sea Grant, and I know a lot about riding home and seeing signs that say birds don't exist and wondering what that means, but I don't know a lot about the Great Lakes. I'm joined today by Carolyn Foley. Carolyn, what's up?
I not much is up, but I believe that birds don't exist thing is like the whole like, are birds real or are they just, yeah. I mean, that's a whole conspiracy theory that we don't want to cover on the show.
Well, I know. I just found out about I wrote home. So we were going to record this, and so I had to leave the office and ride to my mobile studio, which is in my house. And so I wrote home I saw this guy holding up a sign that said birds don't exist. It was a big flag on campus. And so when you see a sign like that, there's only one reaction to have, and that's bleep yeah. And so I gave him like a bleep yeah, birds don't exist. And then I realized, what did I just agree to? I mean, in principle, I agree. Maybe birds don't exist, but what is this? So I need to do some Googling. So listener, birds probably exist. And I just need to find out about that.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, there's a whole can of worms. I mean, happy reading there.
Oh, is there really?
Yeah, it's interesting.
All right. Well, there we go. So, and that will count then as this week's. No, it won't actually. I was going to have a Great Lake factoid, but it's a different Great Lake factoid, and we're not sure. And then the other thing happened. So I got this cool electric bike. I don't know. Have I told you about this? It's like a cargo bike for the kids can ride on the back, and it's electric. And the cool thing is like it's got like a little throttle, and so when you're at a standstill, you can kind of get going. And so I pulled up behind some kid. We're at the red light. I was riding home, and I was like, let me show you how it's done, man. And so I got ready, the light turned, and I went to engage my throttle, and then I looked at his bike frame. It also had a battery on it. I was like, I'm so electric. So then I just kind of fell in line behind him. Very sad. Anyway, but here I am, mobile studio. None of that has anything to do with any of this. So we will start off. We have some follow-up, some feedback from a listener. And this is from the great Emily, one of our listeners. And if you remember a couple episodes ago, last episode, I don't know what happened last episode, but a couple episodes ago, we actually had Hope Charters, the original Teach Me About the Great Lakes co-host. And she was talking about visiting a friend of our, colleague of ours on Bois Blanc Island, or as I call it, Bois Blanc Island. And she saw some pudding stone, and I didn't know a lot about pudding stone. And so the great Emily reached out. But before I tell you what she told me about pudding stone, that is going to be the Great Lakes factoid for this week. As soon as I find, there it is. It's a Great Lakes factoid, a Great Lakes factoid. It's a great factoid about the Great Lakes. Cha! And so Emily says via Twitter, the pudding stone contains spots of jasper. Early Brits called it pudding stone because it reminded them of a pudding, which is a steamed fruit cake from back home called Spotted Dick, which contains dried fruit. And as someone who was at one point a teenage boy, I know a lot about Spotted Dick was a common gag gift, I guess, but I've never actually eaten Spotted Dick.
Yeah, they had that on the Great British Baking Show at one point.
Oh, did they?
There's a couple of things where they're doing like the steamed puddings, and it's kind of cool. That's really cool. Thank you, Emily.
There you go. Yeah, so there it is. It's all about the Spotted Dick. And then the second thing, of course, is it is Lakies season. And if you're listening to this shortly after we release it, you have about a week left to nominate things for the Lakies. So what I want you to do is go to bit.ly.com/Lakies21, LAKIES21. And that's bit.ly.com. Or you can go to bit.ly/Lakies21, as Hope will tell you. And nominate things for Lakies. We got a lot of great categories, ranging from like Science Communication of the Year, News Story of the Year, Coolest Thing You Learned on Teach Me About the Great Lakes of the Year, Great Lakes Animal of the Year, all kind of stuff. But the nominations close on December 1st. And so we like to feature a Lakey nominee this time of year. And the one I'm going to feature is actually done by a friend and colleague of ours, Elliot Nelson. He works with Michigan Sea Grant. And he's got this cool thing, called Michigan Birding 101. And I'm presenting this one to make up for the fact that I said bleep yeah to the birds don't exist. And so anyway, so what this is a webinar series. It started early this year. He had a 4-part series about birding tips, winter bird ID, backyard bird feeding, and those sorts of things. So you can go out and check out those 4 as we head into the winter. And that'll be cool. And then there's a fall series about autumn bird IDs and raptors. I'm not sure if that's like the dinosaurs, probably not, but maybe.
It's not the dinosaurs, you silly.
Okay. Ha ha ha. Yeah, no, it's not. It's a bird. I don't know. What is that? Hawks and
Yeah, like birds of prey, right?
yeah, birds of prey. Yeah.
Now
Anyway.
we can talk about Harley Quinn. Nope.
Oh, that's a is that a Marvel or a DC?
A DC, but yeah, but no, that series was like wildly popular, and they said that it was one of the things that they thought was cool. Elliot and the colleagues at Michigan Sea Grant, they thought it was cool because it allowed them to reach so many more people. But then they also had to learn a lot more about the species that were in different locations, which is a really cool thing.
That is really cool. So anyway, I've seen I think one of the Michigan Birding 101s, and it's not just Michigan. So wherever you are in the Great Lakes, go check it out. Good tips. And Elliot's a great guy, and they of course do good work at Michigan Sea Grant. And so it's a really great resource and a really great webinar series. But will it win a Lakey? Tune in to find out.
Also, because we would be remiss not to say this, Michigan does touch 4 of the 5 Great Lakes, so it sort of makes sense that Michigan featured on the Teach Me About the Great Lakes.
That's why it's shaped like a hand, right? It's because it's touching all the Great Lakes, right?
2 mittens.
Wait, the top one's a mitten too?
Yeah.
Are you sure about that? I'll have to check that out.
I am, and I will drop a link into the show notes.
All right. Yeah, put that link in the show notes. I was at a concert. I was at one of these fish concerts, and somebody walked by me with a shirt that said Michigan, America's High Five. And I was like, yeah, man, America's High Five. I like that. So anyway, that T-shirt will not win a Lakey. Maybe Michigan Birding 101 will. Tune in about a month to find out. And right now, though, go vote on Lakies, bit.ly.com/Lakies21. Nominate some stuff, and then we will figure out how to actually award the Lakies probably about 15 minutes before the show begins. Great. But Carolyn, it is, of course, a season in which as the weather starts to turn cold, the leaves go from green to resplendent colors towards brown as they begin to fall down, which is why this season is called fall, because the leaves fall. In Canada, they think the leaves autumn down, but they don't. They fall down. Anyway, it's a time to start turning kind of inward, I think, right? And so one way that people do that is through thinking about sort of good works and charity and what we can do to help our fellow humans or, the natural environment or whatever. It's a time of giving and a time of good works, isn't it?
Yes. And we want to take this episode to acknowledge some of the fantastic work. I mean, so we've talked to a lot of different people who are connected to the Great Lakes in one way or another. They live near them, they recreate near them, they do research on them, or they share historical facts. But I think that, there's so many different organizations at so many different scales, all the way from like local to state or provincial to binational, who are doing really, really awesome work to help protect this resource, which is, really like a very unique resource on the planet, right?
Yep.
So we are talking to a couple. I wanted to mention a few that if you were to Google Great Lakes nonprofits, you'd probably see a couple right away who are doing lots of cool work. The Alliance for the Great Lakes is one of them. Freshwater Future, there's some there. But I wanted to call out specifically the Healing Our Waters Great Lakes Coalition. They host different conferences and things like that. And we'll put a link in there. They've got a bunch of different member organizations. And I think just looking at this list, you get a sense of how many people care about the Great Lakes and how many people are trying to work, either big pieces of the pie or tiny pieces of the pie to try to help preserve this absolutely wonderful resource.
No, I completely agree with that. And when we're looking into sort of people doing good works and nonprofits, that scale thing was what was so stunning to me. Right, exactly. Like all the way from these international things, or even like IAGLR, the International Association for Great Lakes Research. We have attended and podcasted from their conference the last couple of years, down to small groups making a difference within individual areas and states. Like there's this great one that we were talking to somebody from this called Brown Faces Green Spaces in Indiana, and they work to try to expand access in just a small area. Under that idea, I think of thinking globally but acting locally, and I think that thing you mentioned is just right. This is a really unique resource, and doing this show for has it been? Oh my goodness, it's been about 2 years now. Has really helped to drive that home for me. This is a rare, unique, and imperiled, not necessarily fragile, but imperiled resource, right? And So seeing these different organizations at these different scales has been really something else.
Right. So I'm going to go ahead and say that link. It's healthylakes.org/members. That's where the list is that I'm talking about. But we did get a chance to talk to just two, unfortunately. Maybe we can do more in the future. But we talked to two really awesome nonprofits for this episode. So do we want to go to those now?
Yeah, why don't we go to those now?
This is Carolyn, and I'm speaking with Mark Matson, the Lake Ontario waterkeeper and the president of Swim, Drink, Fish. Sorry.
No, that's exactly it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, Mark, we're really excited to speak with you today about the work you're doing on Lake Ontario. Can you tell us a little bit about, first, let's back up and say, what is a waterkeeper?
Back in the 90s, when I was an environmental lawyer, I didn't know what a waterkeeper was either, but I got approached by what's the Waterkeeper Alliance. And that's a group of river keepers, bay keepers, stream keepers, water keepers that really, help organize people or communities around having a dedicated group towards protecting the water body where they live. So, I know on the Great Lakes, we have Milwaukee River Keeper, Detroit River Keeper, Buffalo Niagara River Keeper, Save the River, I know has a St. Lawrence River Keeper. So we have these groups and they really focus, 100% on the community and the water and the watershed that they live in. I like to define it because I'm on the Great Lakes, and out of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement back in 72, I think it's the 50th anniversary next year, it really set out the gold standard was to protect the Great Lakes so they're swimmable, drinkable, and fishable. And, that was a really amazing way to define what we're for on the Great Lakes while we work against what we're against. But it really helps define, scientifically, legally, the roles of public health and others around these uses, because it's great. I always say, swimmability, recreational water is the gateway for many of us to our connection with the Great Lakes, and drinkability clearly is like, it's the foundation of why we're here. And fishability really links to a past where a lot of people got their food from the Great Lakes. And although it's not as common any longer, maybe it should be, maybe that's a red flag. But so that's for humans. And then think about, the creatures that can't read the signs, don't drink, don't swim, and don't fish in that water. They're not getting those warnings. So we have this incredible, then loss to the ecosystem as well. So if we set out to have swimmable, drinkable, fishable water on the Great Lakes, and we have groups that are dedicated to making sure that that happens in every community, that's sort of the idea behind the Waterkeeper movement.
That's awesome. Thank you. And so can you tell me a little bit more about specifically what you're doing in the Lake Ontario, the lake itself, and if it's surrounding tributaries or things like that, to help it be swimmable, drinkable, and fishable?
Sure. It's our 20th anniversary, so I have so many stories. And we've worked in so many different places, but I always chronologically, I was an environmental lawyer. I was representing a lot of communities. And at the time in the 90s, there was a lot of real focus around landfills and discharging of toxins into rivers and into bays and into communities. And I was working a lot on closing and capping those sites, some historic and some still operating. So when I became the Lake Ontario Waterkeeper, I continued with a lot of that work and ultimately found myself at the large nuclear waste sites on the lake. Lake Ontario has both the Darlington and the Pickering nuclear power plants. Both have 8 reactors. And then a little town of Port Hope and Port Granby, where they have where the fuel's made. Cameco makes the fuel on the lake as well. And they have a lot of historic waste. So we did a lot of work there, sampling, defining the waste, and we tried to bring charges against the government. But at the end, they put together the largest cleanup on the Great Lakes, I think, ever. It's about $1.5 billion now in a small community of Port Hope to clean up the historic waste. And of course, there's still processes in place with the bigger high-level waste, which there still isn't any solution to. But, these were issues we really worked on early. Then sewage. I started finding, as the water keeper, the number one question I had was, can I swim in the lake? And I didn't have the answers. I knew, depending on where you were, some places were unswimmable and some weren't. And so we started to define the public spaces and the beaches. We started with water quality sampling, getting it from the public health, and we produced beach reports. Ultimately, with technology, we created an app that's free to anyone, and we started updating water quality on that free app. It's called Swim Guide, theswimguide.org. And that swim guide, I think there's over 2,000 beaches on the Great Lakes. You can go, anybody listening today can go look at that and find their own beaches. There's an app and on Google and Apple as well. But that actually grew beyond the Great Lakes, and there's 8,000 beaches worldwide now. We're in 11 countries, but there's a lot of affiliates, a lot of groups, local groups that collect water quality data, recreational water quality data, and are sharing it on that platform for free. So it's built a real nice community around swimmable waters, which was a response to sewage. And then more recently, we're making a real push now with respect to waterfront revitalization and ensuring that there's accessible water for communities. So often they create these paths, great for bikes, which I love, the paths, public access, and you can get to the water, but you can't get in it for whatever reason. And I think that those links are so important to our communities, because that's, as I said from the beginning, like that's where people create their first connection, their emotional connection, and go on their own journey and discover the needs of their community and meet people who are working for swimmable, drinkable fish water. So we're starting with these piers. We have one signature one in Kingston, Ontario. It's called the Gord Edgar Downey Pier.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Go ahead.
A friend of mine and board member who lived across the street and always said he'd help us out at Lake Ontario Waterkeeper if we could ever get swimmable water in front of his house. So he did. We did get the name, and it's his father's name in the middle of it. Gord unfortunately passed away before we jumped off a year later, but it is named after him. And it's a really, people think it's weird that an environmental lawyer thinks it's great that he created a swimming pier, but it's all linked through my work at Waterkeeper.
Right, that totally makes sense. So I am really glad that you brought that up. I'm a Canadian living in the US, so I definitely watched the CBC live stream of the Tragically Hip event, and I'm going to put all of the links into the show notes, which I believe will be at teachmeaboutthegreatlakes.com/45 for episode 45. I'll ask Stuart to correct that piece of this recording if I have the wrong number and I messed up somehow. But yeah, so I'm actually really excited that you brought that up.
He was a really great person. Anybody who's listened to the Tragically Hip music knows him as a singer, but and maybe more recently his work for Indigenous communities in Canada, and we did a lot of traveled with him. But he was an incredibly committed person to water, and anyone who listens to his songs, how many are about water, and he really worked hard on connecting people to the lakes and reminding them that that was his muse. That's where he got all his ideas, his power, his creativity. And he was always very open about that. And that, Lake Ontario for him really was like his heart. And we did a Heart of a Lake once tour, and he named it Heart of a Lake because he always felt like the lake really was his heart.
That's fantastic. So what is a project that is kind of on the horizon for you that you're really excited about?
Well, continuing on the theme of piers, in Toronto, we've been sampling around the city for a number of years, looking to see, Toronto only has 11 beaches. 8 of them are blue flag, which is great. So there is accessible water. During COVID, the demand went through the roof. It's clear that we don't have enough accessible water. And we've been sampling around the city, and there is an accessible, really incredible beach on the southern side of downtown on something called Ontario Place, which was a piece of land owned provincially for many years. Originally was intended to try and connect Torontonians to Lake Ontario. For those who didn't have a cottage, they had a place to go. But it doesn't have a beach, swimmable water, and yet we sampled and found that it could be some of the cleanest water, and it was walkable to the core. And it's so beautiful and so wild that we've been really promoting it for 4 years, that anyone who does anything there should keep the public beach and create that link for Torontonians. And my experience from the Gord Downey Pier is it would be the most popular place in Toronto in the summer, but it would also have that, what Canadians like to do. We don't usually walk into the water. We like to jump in. And so have a pier and have deep water, cool water, and that experience with wilderness in the community in downtown Toronto would be a great thing. So I'm really focused on that. I'm working trying to get provincial, federal, local, public health, teams together to really make sure that piece of that piece of the Lake Ontario that we're working to clean up the other areas, but this one is now. And we do a lot of things for our children and stuff, but I also think we need to do things for ourselves sometimes. And if we can create a pier there in my lifetime, that'd be a great thing. It's something I'm working on. We're also, we're still working on the nuclear issues. They're really serious. There's a lot of issues in terms of money and where the cleanups happen, and the other lakes are involved, as you know, deep water geological proposal up in north of Godrich, Bruce nuclear plant there, in Port Elgin and stuff. What else are we working on? And then sewage, we're really promoting real-time monitoring of all discharges from all urban centers and cities. It's easy, it's technologically available to do. I mean, they monitor everything. I don't know why we don't know where the pipes are and when they're discharging and what they're discharging on a real-time basis. So the city of Kingston does that now, and we've got 3 other cities in Ontario and 2 others in Canada. But we have 800 municipal water systems in Canada. You guys probably have 3,000 on the Great Lakes in the US, and I don't know how many Canada, but that data should be available in real time for the public, so they know they can always check the water where they are. And if there is a pipe there and it hasn't been, the CSOs are still, combined sewer overflows, the public should know, and they should know when they're discharging. And so we're really pushing for that. We borrowed from a policy from New York State. It was a right to know sort of policy. I don't think it ever got adopted, but we've been building on that, those principles, and we've produced a sort of a model sewage alert on our website that any community can use and go to their town council and ask that their water utilities abide by that. So yeah, we're working on that. I guess lots of other things, but those are good.
Those are some of the exciting. Okay, so where can people go to learn a little bit more about your organization and all these really awesome initiatives that you have going?
Well, so 2 real cool platforms we've created. One is the swim guide. Definitely go to the swim guide, check your beach, see if what's going on in your community, and maybe you want to contribute data to that platform. We also have something called the Great Lakes Guide. It's just greatlakes.guide. And it's a platform that connects people to the Great Lakes in different ways, new communities, people who don't, other articles about things you didn't know about the Great Lakes, very similar to what you're doing. That's why I love the show. About the Great Lakes, I think water literacy about the Great Lakes is such an important, component to protecting the Great Lakes. So that connection is so important. So that's why we have the Great Lakes Guide. And then Swim, Drink, Fish, that's the parent website, Swim, Drink, Fish. And then there's Lake Ontario Waterkeeper, which is the lake site. And hopefully if you go to those sites, you can find if you're looking for other groups anywhere in the Great Lakes. I think we try and make those links and tell the stories about each other, because we understand too that we all need to work together, particularly on the Great Lakes. The 8 states, the 2 provinces, the 2 countries, we have a lack of Indigenous representation and governance. That has to be fixed going forward. Lack of, even though you guys put a lot of money in the Great Lakes just a couple of days ago, but that's great. But lack of sort of coordinated funding between the 2 governments and other governments. And I just think, we just need to update on what waste we've put in and what our goals are. And I'd love them to affirm swimmable, drinkable, fishable water again going forward as, realistic goals for every community. And let's not normalize water that is unfit for swimming or for drinking or for fishing.
That's great. This has all been fantastic. I really have enjoyed speaking with you and listening to all of the great work that your organization is doing. It wouldn't be Teach Me About the Great Lakes if I didn't ask you the very important question, which is, if you could have a great donut for breakfast or a great sandwich for lunch, which would it be?
Well, given that I haven't eaten today, like both of them are really my attention. And being Canadian, and always having a coffee, historically it would have been that donut with coffee. Now that I'm 60, I might be looking for a healthier sandwich and skipping the donut. So I'll go with the donut for now, and then I'll get healthier next year.
That sounds like a good plan. And so where can we go to get a really good donut are you in Toronto or are you in Kingston right now?
I'm in Toronto.
All right. So in Toronto, where can we get a really good donut?
Well, Princess Donuts up on DuPont is a good one, I think. I don't know if they're there anymore. Otherwise, probably I end up always, unfortunately, but I always end up at the Tim Hortons, just having a straight up apple fritter if they have them. Otherwise, a honey dip donut. Those are sort of the two standards.
So thanks, Mark. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. Best of luck with your work. And thank you for coming on and teaching us about the Great Lakes.
All right, I'm talking with Mark Fisher. He is the president and CEO of the Council of the Great Lakes Region. And they have a new or newish circular Great Lakes initiative that I want to hear all about today. Mark, how are you?
Nice to be with you, Stuart. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, we're glad to have you on. So first, let's start with what is the Council of the Great Lakes Region? I'm not familiar with this council, but anything called council must be big.
Great question, Stuart. Thanks for asking it. We've actually been around since 2013. And the idea of the council really came out of a body of research that was being undertaken by Brookings, the Metropolitan Policy Program, the Mowat Center at the University of Toronto at the time, to really think about this Great Lakes region. So 8 Great Lakes states, New York to Minnesota, Ontario and Quebec, has this massive shared economy between both countries. And so what can we do across sectors and borders to really improve this region's long-term competitiveness, because it is a fully integrated economy, but also how do we work together across borders to protect the Great Lakes, to protect the environment for future generations? And that research culminated in a conference in 2011 in the Detroit Windsor area that brought together over 400 different leaders from business, from all levels of government, academia, the broader nonprofit sector. And what came out of that conversation was that we really needed to have a forum in the region where all of those different interests and perspectives could come together as one to really understand these large socioeconomic environmental issues that we're facing this mega region, not just the Great Lakes. And ultimately, how do we then connect, convene, work together to identify the pathways, the solutions that will do a better job of harnessing the region's economic strengths and assets, improving the well-being of the region's citizens. This region is, on a broad basis, home to 107 million people. But then also, how do we protect the Great Lakes? And so that really led to the Council of the Great Lakes Region's creation in 2013. It started with a nonprofit corporation in Ontario and Canada. And then a few years after that, we created a 501c6 organization in Ohio called Council of the Great Lakes Region USA. And then we have a 501c3 foundation called the Council of the Great Lakes Region Foundation, or CGLR Foundation, which is where the lion's share of our work happens, because most of the stuff that we do is charitable and in the public interest, and really trying to advance, again, this multi-sector, multi-stakeholder dialogue. So we've been around for a while. We're growing, and really appreciate the opportunity to explain a bit more about our mission and our mandate.
Yeah, sure. So what are some of the things, so you've been around longer than I realized. So that's about 9 years coming up. What are some of the sort of keystone accomplishments in that time? And, first of all, bringing together groups of people is hard,
Sure.
And slow, right? But what kinds of stuff have you all done in that time?
Yeah, well, it is slow. It is tedious. There are historical organizations in the region. Obviously we've got the Conference of Great Lakes Governors and Premiers. We've got the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Cities Initiative, which engages mayors. We've got the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus, which is a consortium of state, provincial lawmakers that care about the Great Lakes in the region. We've got the Great Lakes Task Force at the congressional level. But these groups very rarely ever connect and convene and talk to each other, and doing so alongside, again, other experts and participants, again, whether that's industry leaders, whether that's academia or the environmental groups. And so one thing that we did early on in our mandate was launch the Great Lakes Economic Forum. And because of the pandemic, we've had to postpone that since 2020, hoping to get back to it in person next year in Chicago. But the Great Lakes Economic Forum has really been our platform for bringing together all these different perspectives to talk about these issues and to ultimately build dialogues coming out of the forum, and a commitment to work together whether it's looking at creating a group that wants to look at the Great Lakes auto sector and the future of mobility, and how does that sector remain competitive, in this global economy? How do we think about, healthcare and aerospace and space technology strengths that we have in the region? How do we think about how we can be a North American and global leader in producing more food for an increasingly hungry world, and doing that in a sustainable way? So the forum has been this great place for really talking about these sectors and industries that we have in the region, how they are connected across borders, and what more we need to do to make them successful, and so that the region can compete and win in the future. But it's also then looking at, again, how do we work together to protect the Great Lakes, protect the environment for future generations? It is the largest freshwater system in the world. There are legacy issues that we need to tackle and combat. And, the United States has been doing, a tremendous job through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative in really addressing some of those past conflicts with the economy, cleaning up those areas of concern, for example, addressing nutrients, responding to climate change, invasive species. On the Canadian side, however, it's been a lot slower. We've been, one of the successes we've had is really trying to marshal a larger network and a stronger voice to make sure that both governments are equally investing in the protection of the Great Lakes, and making sure that we're developing a sustainable future, a sustainable economy in this region. So
why do you, so that's surprising for me to hear that you feel like Canada would be another word for it, that Canada's been a little bit behind the United States, because kind of in my mind, I'm like, in Canada, they got your health care, they're more progressive, and that sort of stuff, as opposed to the United States. But that's you're saying they're a little bit slower. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's hard to say, but here are the numbers, Stuart. So since 2008 and the launch of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, the United States has spent over $2 billion on restoration priorities. Again, climate change, nutrients, invasive species, cleaning up areas of concern. And that. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is roughly a $350 million a year spend, growing to about $450, I think, over the next 3 to 4 years, $450 million. And then with the passage of the infrastructure bill, Congress has just approved, an additional $1 billion for Great Lakes restoration over the next 5 years. So if you add that on top of the baseline funding, it's an incredible investment that the United States is making in the Great Lakes. On the Canadian side, our freshwater action plan, which is for all of the country, is $75 million a year spend over 5 years, right? And then when you look at it just in terms of the Great Lakes investment, it's only about $9 million a year, for $45 million over 5 years. So we're not even in the same conversation, right? And I think we've been doing a lot of work over the last couple of years just to remind the government of Canada that this is a binational asset. It's a globally significant ecosystem. Canada, used to be a global leader when it came to environmental science, water management, water conservation. And so really now it's time to level up and to really start investing more, again, in cleaning up areas of concern, but getting ready to respond to those emerging pressures that we all know are coming, in particularly in terms of climate change. In the last election, the Trudeau government, which was reelected, did campaign on investing $1 billion over 10 years in a strengthened freshwater action plan. So that would be about $100 million a year. We don't know exactly how much that will mean for the Great Lakes, but it's certainly a lot more than what's been there. They also campaigned on creating an independent Canada Water Agency. And so, as the Parliament in Canada, comes back next week after the election, and we see our, the next budget, we're hoping to see all these priorities, come to the foreground and sort of be implemented by the Trudeau government, and really start a process of catching up to the United States. And we think the timing is perfect. Next year is the 50th anniversary of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. And so, we really need to start becoming a lot more aligned between both countries in terms of how we think about this resource and protect this resource for future generations.
And so one thing that y'all are doing as part of the Council of the Great Lakes region, then, so that's, first of all, is right. anytime you have council in your name, you're doing big stuff. And so that's good.
I
It's
won't
always
disagree with that, Stuart.
Yeah, I'll confirm my own prior. But one of the things you're doing that's smaller than all of this, but still big, is this Circular Great Lakes initiative. Can you tell me a little bit about what is that exactly?
Yeah, well, again, thanks for asking the question. As we know, over the last decade plus, the science about the ocean gyres, plastic waste and erosions, has certainly been picking up pace. And I think, that really, captured everybody's attention when that photo of the straw in the turtle's nose circulated the globe. And I think, a photo can say so much. And I think it really did galvanize, industry and government and so many others about the fact that we've got this ocean's plastic waste problem, and we need to start really, addressing it in a significant way. And, that started the global conversation. But around that time, over the last couple of years, and particularly when Canada was hosting the G7, and was really focused on developing an oceans charter, which included plastic litter, plastic waste. We were putting our hand up as an organization and reminding both the United States and Canada that, what we're seeing through research in the Great Lakes, that we've got an emerging and very concerning plastic waste and plastic litter problem right here in our own Great Lakes, in our freshwater ecosystem, which in many ways functions as an ocean because it is so big. And just to give you, some of the numbers, so, roughly 80% of the material that's washing up on the Great Lakes shoreline is plastic. Research by the Rochester Institute of Technology, estimates, through formulas that are used, equations that are used for the oceans, it estimates that roughly 20 million pounds of plastics could be flowing into the Great Lakes every year through a variety of sources and pathways. As a region, we're still sending way too much of valuable material to our landfills, an extraordinary amount of materials, that could be reused in our economy or just getting lost as waste to our landfills. And so, because of that, we launched the Circular Great Lakes Initiative to really try to bring together, the different sectors and value chains that sort of make and use plastics, policymakers and others, to look at how do we understand the major gaps in the Great Lakes region when it comes to collection, processing, and end markets, how consumers interact with plastics products, how do they think about recycling, how are governments through their policies and regulations, enabling, sort of a more circular economy as opposed to incentivizing, waste to landfill. We have very low tipping fees for landfills in the region, which is part of the problem. So how are governments, ensuring that we can improve the capture and recovery of valuable materials and get that material back into a circular economy? But also, how are we investing in infrastructure? Our material recovery facilities, in many ways were designed for a waste stream 20, 30 years ago. And it was much simpler then. It was glass and it was paper and it was metals. And so with the addition of plastics, the waste stream has become a lot more complex. And so we needed that modernization of that technology. And so the Circular Great Lakes Initiative was really a first attempt at bringing together, again, these different players and actors to think about how we perform as a region when it comes to those issues, and really trying to then create a roadmap, a North Star in terms of how do we create a more circular economy in the Great Lakes. And just as a final thought, as we capture more waste, recover more valuable material, and have it reused in the economy, but also looking at how do we reduce sometimes our reliance on plastics, obviously that will mean less litter flowing into our environment in our Great Lakes. And so, this is really a systemic roadmap in terms of how do we do a better job of creating more circular systems and cities and industries in the region. The byproduct of that, hopefully, will be less waste and litter in our environment. And then, just as a final thought, as we're doing the Circular Great Lakes, we've also launched an initiative called the Great Lakes Plastics Cleanup, with an initiative in partnership with Pollution Probe, also with some funding from NOAA to expand it in the United States, where we're actually trying to clean up plastics in the environment because we know it's there. It needs to be cleaned up at the same time as we're trying to create this larger circular economy in the Great Lakes.
That's what I think is, so that's interesting is you're doing the kind of bottom up, I guess, or, like picking up the stuff, but also working on this big level. What I think is interesting about the circular economy approach, which I hadn't actually heard about until we interviewed somebody from the University of Toronto trash team a couple of episodes ago, but it's treating this as the way you put it was we can use this stuff in our economy, right? It's an explicitly economic approach to an environmental problem, which is it's a little bit different from what we normally hear about, right? Which is the economy and the environment are kind of in conflict. Here's an explicit economic solution to it. I think that's a really interesting approach.
It is an interesting approach. We certainly feel that when we look back at sustainability issues, the economy, the environment, traditionally people have seen them in conflict, but we actually think that they can work together. They don't have to be this competing, demands between, do you grow the economy? Do you protect the environment? We think that you can do both. We can do it in a way that is good for people, good for planet, and is good for profit, right? And so it is trying to marry those concepts. And I think if we can do that and demonstrate how we can do that in a region like the Great Lakes, which is, again, North America's economic engine, is by far the most important economic region to the United States and Canada. If we can demonstrate we can do this in the Great Lakes region, we will ensure our long-term competitiveness and sustainability, which is good for the region, but also will make us more competitive, in a global economy that is ultimately shifting, to these new industries and these new services and these new kind of sustainable mindsets.
Well, Mark, this is really interesting stuff, and it sounds like you're doing great work, but that's actually not why we invited you on Teach Me About the Great Lakes this week. The reason that we invited you on Teach Me About the Great Lakes is to ask two questions. The first one is this. If you could have a great donut for breakfast or a great sandwich for lunch, which would you choose?
I'd have to say for breakfast, it would be a double chocolate donut. And that's
chocolate donut.
Yeah. And that's just to give me that sugar punch in the morning and get me going alongside of coffee.
Yes, I love it. So where are you based out of these days?
I'm actually based in Ottawa, Canada. And in a non-pandemic year, I'd spend most of my time traveling across the region on both sides of the border. And now that the U.S.-Canada border is opening up and more people are getting vaccinated, obviously it's becoming a bit easier to sort of get back and travel again and really experience this beautiful region that we call the Great Lakes.
There we go. So before we get there, I want to hear about your travels. Where can I go to get a really great donut? Either in Ottawa or, since you're so well-traveled, anywhere throughout the Great Lakes.
I'm a bit biased, but if you ever make it to Ontario, Canada, and I understand that the chain is expanding into the United States, but my favorite donuts are from Tim Hortons.
Okay.
Yeah, which is kind of like your Dunkin' Donuts.
I know Tim Hortons. Yeah, they have them somewhere. My wife is from the Midwest. I'm from the Gulf South. But somewhere we used to go to a family thing that had Tim Hortons. And so I remember one morning, I don't know why I went into Tim Hortons at 2. I can't remember if I was coming or going, but I've been to Tim Hortons. Fantastic. But so you are well-traveled, and that kind of brings us to the second question, right? Is there like a place in the Great Lakes? We like to share wonderful places to try to help people realize what an amazing resource this is. Is there a place in the Great Lakes that's really special to you? And if so, why is that?
It's always a tough question because I deal with the Great Lakes, and it's like having multiple children. You love them all equally. And I've traveled with my family from the bottom of the, Great Lakes and Lake Ontario to the top in Lake Superior. And there are so many beautiful places all in between. I would have to say my favorite is where I grew up, which is Cobourg, Ontario. It has the slogan of Ontario's feel-good town. It's right on Lake Ontario. It's got one of the best beaches on Lake Ontario. That's where I go home to really recharge my batteries when I have an opportunity to do so.
That sounds awesome. I agree. Well, Mark, if people want to find out more about the Circular Great Lakes Initiative or the Council in the Great Lakes region or even the Great Lakes Plastic Cleanup, where should they go?
Well, our main website is councilgreatlakesregion.org, and I certainly encourage people to go there. If they want to learn more about the Circular Great Lakes Initiative, they can go to that project website, which is circulargreatlakes.org, and that is a more specific website for that initiative. But either way, we would certainly welcome people to visit us and learn more about us and hopefully think about becoming a member and potentially a donor through our CGLR Foundation.
Where's the best place to do that?
Yeah, I was going to say you can do that through our main website, councilgreatlakesregion.org. You can see on the About page how to become a member in the U.S. or Canada or how to donate. And as you know, with most nonprofits, our success is really driven by the people who want to join and participate and support our work financially. So we would certainly welcome that.
Great. Well, I encourage you listeners to go look at the show notes for all of those links and more. And look at this really worthy cause doing important work and doing it from a perspective that's a little bit different from a lot of what we have on the show. So I really appreciate you lending that to us. Mark Fisher, the president and CEO of the Council of the Great Lakes region. Thank you so much for coming on and teaching us about the Great Lakes.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Stuart.
Right, so that was a fun conversation that I had with Mark Matson. I really, really enjoyed speaking with him. And he said he'd be willing to come back and chat with us again about all the cool work they're doing. So
yeah, that's great. I can't wait. Yeah, we haven't done our editorial planning for next year. We need to. But it'd be great to talk to him again. And also great to talk to Mark Fisher again, of course. It seems like he could talk for hours and hours about the important issues going on in the Great Lakes. And I really appreciated the chance to get that sort of different perspective because we don't talk to groups quite like that and people who work so closely with industry. We tend to be more on the academic and hippy-dippy side.
One thing I did kind of note during my conversation with Mark Matson was, just how many things the strength of personal connection to the lakes, which and how some people can live right next to the lakes and maybe not have that personal connection the same way. So I feel like that's a theme that runs through. We've got a couple of themes through Teach Me About the Great Lakes. Modeling is cool. Personal connections, values, and things like that. So it's just really fun to talk to people about this place.
No, I hear you. Yep. And that's part of why we changed the second question, right? To asking about places that are, wonderful places within the Great Lakes. Because I like to explore that personal connection with people a little bit.
I certainly didn't forget to do the second question in my interview.
Good. I know because I've listened to your interview already. And so I know that you didn't forget to do it. But anyway, it reminds me, when I worked at Texas Sea Grant, one of the things we would talk about that identity idea a lot. And you're right, it is a theme here too, because the idea was we thought that felt like for a lot of people, Texas wasn't a coastal state, but a state with a coast. And so you sort of get that, and that idea of connection is the same thing. And obviously that wasn't true for everybody in Texas, but at Sea Grant, at Texas Sea Grant, what we talked about was how do we instill that ethic of it being a coastal state, not just a state with a coast.
Plug again for the bits that we talked about at the beginning that you can learn about all like these, not just the two that we spoke with, but a bunch of other nonprofits as well. We'll put a bunch of links into the notes. We encourage you to discover what they're doing.
No, I agree. Yeah, absolutely. You should do that. And if, obviously it's a crazy time right now, but if you do have some, the ability, these are wonderful places to support with your dollars too. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that we are also a wonderful place to support with your dollars. And so we'll have a link if you want to donate to Illinois Indiana Sea Grant or Teach Me About the Great Lakes as well. But we encourage you to support whatever charity speaks to you, whether it's one of the ones we featured today, whether it's one in the show notes, or whether it's one that is there, because it's important. And listeners, do you have a favorite Great Lakes related nonprofit or charity or something like that? You can email it to us and maybe we'll talk about it on the air a little bit. That's teachmeaboutthegreatlakes@gmail.com. Or more better.
More betterer, yes.
More betterer. Why don't you call the hotline? 765-496-IISG. That's 4474, as everybody can tell you. So I encourage you to go and do that.
Yes, we would love to hear from people.
Yeah, no, we do love to hear from you. So tell us your favorite Great Lakes and why it's awesome. Either leave a message or leave an email, and we will talk about it on the air. Teach Me About the Great Lakes is brought to you by the fine people at Illinois Indiana Sea Grant. And we encourage you to check out the great work that we do at iiseagrant.org and at ILIN Sea Grant on Facebook, Twitter, and other social media. Teach Me About the Great Lakes is produced by Hope Charters, the music knower Carolyn Foley, Megan Gunn, and of course, Renee Miles. Ethan Chitty is our associate producer and our fixer. Our super fun podcast artwork is by Joel Davenport. The show is edited by the awesome Quinn Rose, who hates me. And I encourage you to check out her work at aspiringrobot.com. If you have a question or comment about the show, please email it, teachmeaboutthegreatlakes@gmail.com. Leave a message on our hotline at 765-496-IISG. You can also follow the show if you want to Twitter at Teach Great Lakes. thank you so much for listening. And of course, keep grading those lays.